Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to this live stream. I am really actually quite happy to do this and to have a guest today for doing this session because let me tell you how this started actually just briefly. I don't know if it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, something like that. There was I shared a post in another group, and a person answered, and we started going through a couple. We exchanged a couple of messages, apparently not agreeing on certain things. Then he said, "Well, I'm more than happy to have a video session, a live session where we can exchange opinion, and I can explain this better." And I'm all for it because, as I mentioned in the post in the group, I had, and as I was mentioning to him a little earlier, I grew up in a sort of very small town where everybody is looking out for themselves and they're sort of looking at their little garden and they're not letting anybody spy in and everything else. And then I bumped into a few teachers that actually taught me exactly the opposite. Luckily, it was early in my life, early enough to learn about it. They taught me to go out to seek new experiences, to seek new perspective, new point of views, and everything else. And this is one of the best ways that you can have as a conductor, as a musician, as a person in general. But since we're talking about conducting, let's stick to conducting. As a conductor, to grow your expertise, your point of view, to gain different point of views, to think about things in a different way. So, this person is one of the experts, actually, in one of the most famous, popular conducting techniques, which is the Saito technique. And his name is Wayne Toews. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for joining us today, Wayne. As a first thing, for those of you who are not very familiar with it, I would like to ask Wayne to introduce us to the Saito technique, give us a brief, a summary and overview, and what it's all about.
Thank you. Greetings to everybody, and special thank you for providing this opportunity. The Saito conducting method, developed by Hideo Saito, who was a cellist and who studied in Germany with Farberman in the 1920s, and then who went back to Japan as the principal cellist of an orchestra that became the NHK Orchestra under the leadership of Joseph Rosenstock, who was a German and forced out of Germany by the Nazis, and he went to Japan and became the principal conductor of the NHK Orchestra. You'll be able to find some video of the orchestra and some of its development over the years on YouTube. But the important thing to know is that Saito asked the question, why is it easier to follow and make music with some conductors than with others? And so, in addition to his studies with Rosenstock, he started to analyze the gestures. And he contributed a couple of really critically important things to his analysis. And I would ask you for a moment to think about, instead of where the beat or the pulse is shown, where you are before you move to that position. And Saito called it the secondary point. So in a fundamental gesture, such as this gesture, which is called shakui, we have four elements. We have the beat itself, the beat point it's called. Some people refer to as the ictus, but as you know, ictus means accent, and we don't necessarily want the beginning of the sound to be accented or the pulse to be accented. So we have that position, the after point motion, we have the secondary point and the before point motion. And the identification of the secondary point in both time and space is really critical to understanding what's useful to the players. Now, obviously, if we were just take a drumstick and hit a drum, we could easily show where the pulse is. But that's not musical, it's not interesting, and certainly it's not the kind of thing that we would want to use for most pieces of music that I'm aware of. So we look at, what do the musicians need? Well, I've suggested that there are two different categories that we might think of as gestures. One is a gesture that would impose the pulse, and the other is a gesture that confirms it. So we think about, what is it then that we observe that allows us to see where that pulse is? Well, typically we know it's in a particular position in our frame of beat. But we also have to think about, how do we show that clearly? And if we think about that secondary point, that is that place where the motion is the slowest, and where it occurs in the time from one pulse to another, we really can see that moving that motion closer to the next pulse is going to create more energy because of a fall. So that is the fall of the arm. The skills that are shared by Saito is, first of all, the arm drop. And he refers to the fact that if we have some acceleration and deceleration in our motion, it makes it much more clear to the players as we go. And then how do we go beyond that? Well, there's a muscle called the brachioradialis muscle. It's attached at the tendon here near the wrist, and then near the funny bone or the epicondyle at the back. And it's the control of that muscle in very brief bursts that allows you to move the arm without excessive tension. And it means then that you're not going to create some tendonitis or other kinds of problems with your arm. The critical dimension in Saito's method is then he shows what he calls into point and from point gestures. An into point is that gesture that would fall. Some people refer to it as a pendulum-like gesture. And the other is one that bursts from the point and returns through deceleration back to that same place. So, for example, if we had two sounds and then a rest in 3/4 time, we might have do, do. Then that gesture that Saito refers to as an intermediate preparatory motion, which is the same as a preparatory motion, allows one to anticipate what's going to happen on the next pulse. So sometimes I find it easiest to explain, if we were going to do this by tapping our foot, if we're going to have a big stomp and we start up high and we come down forcefully, then we know that the size of the gesture allows the players to anticipate what's going to happen on the next beat. So the question is also, what do the players need? Well, sometimes they need to have a beat imposed, something which is very clear. And other times we need to get out of their way, let them to continue to play, and really allow the music to flow. The printed music has so much information on it. And if we want to have some kind of change to that, we need to make sure that it's on that printed music. Earlier in our discussion, we talked about the number of groups that can play without a conductor. And so we really need to think about, how do we set it up so that we are needed? And one of the things is that the conductor and the performers need to feel subdivision in the same kind of way. So if we're feeling ya da 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 dee da 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 dee da da da, as opposed to ya da da dee da da dee da da, if we have conflict in the subdivisions, then of course any things that we want to do that are artistic tend to be diminished. We'll put it that way. So that, in a nutshell, analysis and his discovery or revelation of the secondary point, the place where it's the slowest, and then thinking about, how do we develop skills, And during the time that he worked and developed this, he was transitioning from a girls' school in Japan after the Second World War, and there were lots of pianists around. So the pianists would work with the conductors, including Seiji Ozawa, who was the first graduate of the Toho Gakuen School of Music. So the idea of having a chance to learn working with real live musicians, duo pianists in this case, those of us who have conducted groups of any sort know how fortunate we are to be able to get a response back and to allow us to continue to develop our technique.
I think that we actually have quite a few common points or common grounds. Well, the first thing that actually is part of the schools I went to, well, we can call it the Farberman technique if we want to, or method. Doesn't really matter, but is the philosophical point of our approach, or rather philosophical, very down to earth fact that conductors most of the times are not needed for the orchestra to play. The orchestra does not need a conductor to go from the beginning to the end in 90 to 95% of the repertoire. Now let's keep away some things that might be particularly difficult for the ensemble. Fine, but in a large part of the repertoire, the orchestra does not need the conductor to beat time from the beginning to the end. Certainly, as we were mentioning earlier in our pre-live discussion, if you can do very simple, you can try it in a very simple way. Next time you're in front of the orchestra, ask them to play, start the orchestra and ask them to play with the excuse of wanting to go in the hall and listening to the acoustic. Step away from the podium, let them play, and see how far they'll go. They can go all the way to the end, unless it's something particularly difficult. But so the point is that as conductors, we do need to justify our presence on the podium. We can't just show up and say, oh, well, I'll do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 pattern of some kind, and maybe some expression with the left hand, whatever that means, because that is also something that to me is completely devoid of meaning. Some expression with the left hand means something to you, but it means something completely different to me, and it's going to mean something completely different to 50 people that we have in front of us, or 20 or 15. So everyone will react in a different way, and that contributes to create a non-homogeneous performance. So the point is, what do we do in order to, once we step on the podium, in order to justify our presence for the musicians? And I think this is something that we really have in common in terms of idea of what a conductor is or what a conductor needs to be doing. Right?
I agree.
Yeah. Now, what I am usually pushing for instance, is one of the ultimate thing that I push for with students is breaking the pattern. Meaning getting out of the cage of doing this 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, whatever pattern we have in front of us, and actually doing something meaningful that shows the music. And in order to be able to break the pattern without confusing the musician, because you can't just start dancing around and doing all sort of stuff that has nothing to do with music. I'm not talking about the show off. I'm talking about showing exactly what it is that's on the page, which is what you were mentioning earlier on. The score has so much information in it that reducing it to a simple pattern is meaningless. It's actually an offense to the composer and to the score and to the players themselves, actually. But at the same time, I need a way to break off and break free from that pattern in a way that the musicians would understand. So my starting point is actually the pulse, because the pulse is the smallest and gesture and most focused gesture that you can use to drive the orchestra backward, forwards, accelerando, rallentando. It holds the preparation and the release, which is something that you were mentioning earlier, even if it was in different terms, is the gesture that comes before the players play and the gesture that comes after. So the delivery of the promise. When you make a preparation, you promise something to the players, which is dynamic character of the music that is about to that they are about to play, articulation, and everything else. And then that's your preparation, and then the release needs to deliver on that promise and on that preparation. And for me, that comes. It all boils down from to the starting point. The starting point of it is actually the pulse. And in order to have the pulse, it's actually, you're right, we do have quite a few similarities, because the starting point, in order not to have the tension that you mentioned in here and in here sometimes, or cause certain injuries in terms of tendinitis and stuff, the starting point is, for me, in the wrist. And that needs not to be locked, because the moment that this is locked and stiff, then everything else is bound to be locked and stiff, or it's bound to do this. And when you have this kind of movement, then the focus, which is the tip of the baton, goes down the drain. Because if you look at it from the point of view of a player, and you look at this type of disjunctive movement, then you have one point of reference here, one here, one here, and then maybe you have the bouncing of on the knees, and you add another one. And then whoever looks up doesn't know where to look or what the point of reference is. So for me, the actually point of reference is whether you do it this way or this way. It's actually in the wrist, with the rebound that fulfills the promise of either a short note, long note, sforzato, whatever the articulation, the dynamic is in the thing. But I would like to ask you a question, actually, if you don't mind, because you did mention something that is I'm actually quite curious about, which is the different speed. And I think this is one point where we have a different point of view. The speed of the gesture that changes, because if I understand correctly, and now here really correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understand correctly, the speed is different in order to allow the players to understand when they should play. So it and the speed of your stroke differs in order to get the players to, in order to anticipate the players, so that they can understand when they play and they all go down together. Did I understand that correctly?
I would suggest no. Let me tell you that in a large conference in New York, I showed how I could drop a ball from above my head and ask everybody, there were about 300 in the room, to clap when the ball hit my hand.
Right.
And then I turned my back and did the same thing, and everybody clapped at exactly the same time.
Yeah.
So the question is, what is it that's in the information about the falling? Now, we know that on gravity alone, something will fall accelerating at 9.8 meters per second every second. So I calculated at this distance, for me, it takes about a 1/12 of a second for my arm to fall down. The critical part in all of this stuff is that instead of looking at where the beat point is, let's look at where the slowest part or the apex might be, in order to think about how we're going to prepare for it to fall. Now, I need to make sure that you understand that this is one of just a really broad range of gestures that Saito has analyzed. You showed a gesture like this. That's referred to Namigata Heikinundo, which is a smooth snake-like motion. And that could be used for maybe one beat or two beats as something that just keeps moving along with the music. So let me show you the three basic gestures that are into point. The first of these is just this swinging kind of motion. And you should be able to get a sense of what the subdivision of the beat is. And if we're thinking about conducting a string orchestra, you should have some sense about how I'm moving the bow. Now, if I want more energy out of the sound, and it often results in a heavier attack, I would use something called tataki, which is the arm drop, like this. And I've waited a little longer at the top before I fall. That's what gives it the energy. But I'm totally relaxed when I'm able to make that gesture. I can also make a very rapid gesture in curves like this, and that's called a hard shakwi. The terminology here isn't all that important. If we want to show the beat, but without having a heavy attack, a smooth sound, we might just move back and forth like this. And I would hope that you'd be able to tell where the beat point is. In some methods, we emphasize this with a click, where you'd go another additional wrist motion to it. And that's useful in different kinds of music for different kinds of players. So we really are trying to adapt our gestures to what's meaningful to the instrumentalists in this case, or even to the singers. How are we going to move with it? There's a different category of gestures, the from point gestures, where, for example, we would go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now, this doesn't allow you to anticipate where the beat is. If it's at a steady tempo, after I've done a couple of these, you could probably clap your hand on the second or third, but it's useless as a way of getting started. So right. They have different purposes. Saito also, and I went to extensive effort to try to find out whether this is a Saito idea or somebody else's. I actually spoke with Joseph Rosenstock about a month before he died, but he wasn't able to describe any of these things in detail for me. But there's a gesture that Saito suggests called senyu. This is a cellist martelé stroke. So I go pinch, go, pinch, go, pinch, go. And it allows me at particularly a slower tempo to be able to allow that kind of preparation. So we have different kinds of preparation depending on the type of gesture we want to use and how it can be useful to the ensemble. Does that answer your question about those?
Yeah. Can you do the last one again, please? Because the pinching.
Okay, so this starts with a stopping motion, it's called. We just pinch into the string and then we burst.
Okay,
pinch,
and then what is the desired effect from that?
Well, we were going to look at the Beethoven movement from his first symphony.
Oh, sure. Actually, hold on a second. I have there. I don't know if you're looking at the Facebook feed as well, but
no, I'm not. But it doesn't matter.
Okay. Doesn't matter. Okay. Well, the people in the Facebook feed will see you, me, and side by side, and on top of it, the first phrase of the Beethoven.
Okay. Now I have to explain that Saito selected this particular movement as the fifth study in the book.
Okay.
But there's interesting story about all of that I'll explain. But you asked how we might use it. Saito suggests that we could use this to show the length of that first sound. Ba-da, ba-da, as opposed to ba-dum. Now, this is a study, but when it's used with an ensemble, it's not sufficiently clear to allow them to start together. So the method book was created with the help of his students. And my teacher, Morihiro Okabe, was in the first class. And I worked with him over 5 years to try and make some sense of this in the English language. I maintained a lot of the Japanese terms because I discovered that even athletes don't have clear terms to describe things such as throwing a javelin or a shot put and so on. So in this particular case then, the stopping motion and then the pull. Now, the interesting thing about the stopping motion is it can be made many, many different ways. It can be done with a little poke, it can be done with a gentle touch. It has to come to a complete stop. So if we were going to use this as a study for this particular movement, we would have a preparatory motion that would go, we'd start with a 1, then 2, and da, dum, bum, ba, dee. Now he actually describes 3 different ways to use through that first measure. The way that I showed after this senyu, ba, dum, has a little bounce to it. The second beat is already anticipated and in place, so I just move from it. I don't have to hit it again. I could make it much more clear that way if I wish. So I could go ba-yum, bum, ba-yum, bum, and make kind of a little check mark that combines all of these things. Mm-hmm. So I would suggest that it has to do with what the ensemble needs. A student group might need something a little bit different than a professional group.
Yeah, okay, well, I can agree to that. But all right, before I'm gonna actually, I'm curious. If you had a professional group, right?
Yes.
So if you could do pretty much whatever you want to, how would you do this beginning?
Okay. I would begin with a gesture called kazutori. It's a flick. It's a finger snap that defines where a beat is. Many conductors now give 2 beats before they start. So they
Which
might
I agree,
go,
it's totally useless, actually.
Okay. So I could go 1, 2, ba, yum, bum, ba. So I would choose with an ensemble to look at the second violins.
Of course.
Yes. And then also, I'm remembering that I'm moving their bow with my gesture. I want to show them how I want their bow to be moved. So again, I would go, yum, bum, yes?
Yeah,
Now, interestingly enough, I want to tell you one more thing first.
Yeah, please.
I went to the New York Philharmonic Library. And if people don't know about it, they offer digitized copies, not only of scores, but also of parts.
Yeah. Incidentally, I have a page on my website with all the resources for conductors, and that's at the top of the list.
Good.
Because you can find all sort of stuff in there that are really interesting. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
The most interesting thing that I found, though, is that there are at least 6 scores with different conductors. There's the Bernstein, the Leinsdorf, and on and on.
Yeah.
And then there are the marked parts. But of the 6, only one has much more than the initial downbeat to start the second violins. So there are some where there's some slurs that are broken. There are some where there's some other parts that are put in that aren't clear in the initial score. So again, when we're thinking about how we want to select a gesture, how we want to use a gesture, it's a matter of how does this fit with the part that's already marked? Because we don't want the gesture to be something different We don't want it to be in conflict with it. And as I think you already talked about many ways of cooking a goose, this is the interesting artistic thing. Once we're empowered with different gestures to do these things, then I think it makes it more interesting for us.
Well, of course, yes. Sorry.
I was going
Were
to
you
say
about
one
to-
other thing, and that is
Yeah.
that I would probably use that gesture, though, for the entrance of the celli. I could use that other one because the tempo is already established,
Right.
and I'm not going to mess them up by doing that.
Right. I certainly, once you have enough of a vocabulary as a conductor, once you have enough of a vocabulary, conducting wise, technically wise, to be free of whatever it is that they taught you in first grade, conducting wise, again, then you can approach a score in many different ways. And that's one of the beautiful thing about it, actually, is that maybe you did it this way, I don't know, 10 years ago, and then now you would do it in a different way, and in 10 years you will do it in in a third way. Of course, you have to have enough grammar in your gestures in order to be able to follow up with your own interpretation. If you don't have that, then you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot to begin with. But anyway, to go back to this little phrase excerpt, I do agree certainly on the fact that there is no need to do 1, 2, tari, because they don't need that. They only need 2 in this case. They start on 3, they only need 2. What I am actually missing a bit in this case, this is how I would do it actually. Oh, rim pim pirim pim pirim pim pa pum pum. Tira 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 tiram. I went a little off camera at the end, but I think you get the picture. Which means what I'm trying to get aside from in the gesture, aside from the articulation, which you get first, you get a pulse to start 1. Ta-dim. Then you get the slur, then you get the short note, then you get short note, then you get, and yes, the second short note doesn't really need anything because it needs a small gesture. First of all, because it's in piano. Second of all, because it bounces off the first one. And third, because it's staccato. Then you need a slur for legato gesture for going from between the first and the second bar, and so forth. But what I was mostly going for, which is what breaks the pattern completely, is the pitch registration, which is following the contour of the line wherever it goes. Now, in this case, normally, we would, if you had to do a 3/8, then you would do 3/1, so up, down. But in this case, that's completely against the music because the music actually goes the other way around. It goes down, up, do, fa, la, si, la, sol, fa, mi, and then it comes back down. So for me, in a situation like this, which can be applied to a whole lot of different situations when the music has the same character. Last movement of Brahms' First Symphony, after the introduction, the first theme of the Allegro, it goes up, sol, do, it doesn't go down, sol, do, sol, do. So pitch registration actually allows me to completely go against 1, 2, 3 and follow where the music goes, meaning showing the line in all its dimensions, from character to dynamic to pitch. And I think this is an extra layer of detailing into showing the music that can be added to conducting technique.
I agree. I think that the critical thing here is that you are interested in shaping.
Yeah.
In shaping those notes. And I think that if the ensemble understands what we're going to do, that's why we have the rehearsal, then it makes it a whole lot easier. In this particular case, because the tempo doesn't change for so long, we can do lots of different things. And I think that there's a certain elegance to your approach that we really need to think about how can we do this with all kinds of different pieces. Now, with the time constraints that we have on rehearsals, I'd like to do something which is really, really easy for everybody to follow. So, for example, when I do the ba-dum, I try not to make it without acceleration because I really want a clear point where they're going to start. On some of those parts from the New York Philharmonic, they clearly say at the tip.
Right.
So they're starting ba-yum, bum, yeah?
Yeah.
And I think that becomes the essence of it. Ultimately, it's what kind of sound do we want to have?
Yeah.
And a
Yeah. Oh,
really important term that you used is in characterization. So without having a long explanation to the orchestra, are we imagining this to be something light and airy? Is this a little girl dancing? Is it a little monster going through the woods? I mean, the whole point being that we really are trying to characterize this, and we need to align our face and our posture, the position here of the gesture, and so on. So everything is aligned. We're really at the service of the players, and
yes.
it's the kind of
I
things that they will need to make it work.
I couldn't agree more with that. We are at the service of the player and the composers, of course.
Absolutely.
Look, I think that this is something. This is one of those other things where we really are on a common ground here. Conductors who step on the podium to show off are not are doing a disservice to the players, to the music, and to the audience. And they're ultimately disrespecting all three of them, including the composers, of course, even if they're dead. Uh, we are not there to put on a show or to make ourselves feel good in, dancing around or pretending to be illuminated by God or whatever it is that the show business instills, the imagery that we get from the show business. That has nothing to do with music. That is, it's good for the camera perhaps, and sometimes it's good for the talk shop in the cafeteria after the concert, or between the first and the second part of the concert. For the audience, it has nothing to do with music. We're there to serve the music, and the fact of the matter is that we need to realize that whatever we do on the podium in terms of movements affects the sound of the orchestra. The orchestra players react to what we do in an automatic way, in an unconscious way, without even realizing it, and without sometimes even wanting it. And when they realize that they react in a certain way that they don't like, they stop looking. That's why when you see conductors on the podium doing all sort of stuff, what is one of the most asked questions from audience, uh, especially if they're not musicians that never played in an orchestra? Why aren't the players looking at the conductor? That is one of the most asked questions ever. What does the conductor do? The players are not even looking at him. Now, the point is that most of the time, they're actually not looking at the conductor, him or her, because the conductor is actually distracting the players from what they should be doing. And the fact of the matter is that in both cases, whether you go for the Saito method or the Farberman method, whatever, the point is that in both cases, we're trying to instill in conductors the idea that whatever they do needs to have a meaning. If they move some way, it needs to be for a purpose and for a reason, not because they think oh no, I should go there because I saw Bernstein do it on a video. That doesn't work. You can't copy Bernstein. You can't copy Karajan. You cannot copy Kleiber. You cannot copy anybody. You cannot copy me or Wayne for that matter if you fancy to do so. And it wouldn't be right and it wouldn't be correct. You can only be yourself because, well, everybody else is already taken, so you can't really do that. And when you try to copy somebody else, then you end up with a bad impression, and you can't really do your own music, which is what everybody is interested about. So if you move from one place to the other in space, in your conductor space, you move your arm, it has to be for a purpose. You move your hand, it has to be for a purpose, with a purpose. So what is your purpose? Why are you moving that there? And I think that Wayne is trying to answer that question. I'm trying to answer that question by telling you, okay, and he is right. I have a certain idea of this piece, which is why I'm moving my hands this way. That reflects my own idea, and uh, uh, I do believe that this is my best way of portraying this idea. It's clear for the players because as long as you have a pulse, the players will go, and once you go with it, then it's fine. It also creates a certain sound, which is the sound that I have in mind for this piece. Now,
Can we
Wayne might
elaborate on
have a
that?
completely different sound in mind, which is perfectly fine. So, but as long as it's personal. Sorry, go ahead. I
No,
actually
can
started to
you
ramble
elaborate?
on because I get really, taken away with this subject. Go ahead.
Could you elaborate on the very first gesture, and as if you were moving your bow?
You mean my first gesture?
Yeah,
Because this I would actually start up. If I'm playing it, I mean, if I'm playing it, if I ask the orchestra to play, when I ask the orchestra to play this, I actually have an up bow. So you can see me, right? I'm in
yes.
in the frame. I would actually have. He started it with a down bow.
That's how it's marked on all the parts.
Yeah, and I would actually start da-rim, pum, pa-rim, pim, or da-rim, pum, pa, but with a very small amount of bow. This for me is really idea in my idea, in my interpretation. This needs to come from nowhere.
When you did the bowing, it was ultimately clear about it.
Yeah,
Maybe it's my perspective here,
perhaps, but
the,
look, I think the point here, what clears is not the gesture up and down. It's the pulse. That's what. Oh, I'm doing it slower now. Okay, just as a to make it clear. I had to do it slower. Boom. That's the two. Da-rim, pum, ba-rim, pim. The pulse is, you know what? The first thing that they teach us in music is that the players, that the instrument imitates the voice. So when we do anything, we actually in music we need to breathe because we play anything we need to breathe. If that imitates the voice, right? And the pickup, the pulsing that starts the piece. Here it started, but it actually the same concept goes in the middle if you have to cue somebody that hasn't been playing for some time. The point is that this is boom, ba-rim, da-rim. You breathe and then you keep going. But the breathing of it, the pulse, that's what initiates everything else. That's why I was actually asking you about the speed of the baton earlier when you were talking about the dropping and different speeds of the baton. Because for me, when you go from one point to another, okay, in this case, we have legato, staccato, legato, staccato, legato, staccato, 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 right? But if you look at bar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where it goes, sorry, you don't have the score, but when it goes the end of the phrase, right, where it goes to, where it goes up. For instance, in that case, I skipped completely beating one bar. It's one long slur. So if I'm starting at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth bar, and you have short, short, with the gesture that makes the legato, or if you prefer, the bowing, or is modeled after the movement of the bow, goes up following the pitch, mi, fa, sol, lands on the B flat, si, do, la, sol, to retract at the end of the phrase.
Now, in this particular situation, I wanted to share with you one more idea, and that is that one of the suggestions in the Saito book is that after we get through that initial two measures, we go ba-yum, bum, ba-yum, bum, ba-yum, bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. So we're using a wrist tataki.
Right.
And of course, there are lots of different areas. Now, you talked about going la la dee dee.
Not quite. Yeah, one movement, but then I finish up. Ti fa sol. Sorry, mi fa sol la si, mi fa sol la si, do la sol. I stay up on the B flat because the B flat goes up. The line goes up, right? T, 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 T. Its legato goes up and then stays on the B flat and then comes back down.
Right. I'm more concerned at that point about the entrance coming up of the viola and cello, but that's
I have another hand.
That's right.
I have another hand for that. So I can use the other hand for that.
Absolutely.
And this is the other thing, the independence of the two hands.
Yes.
Which actually I didn't get to that part because I did read, as I mentioned earlier, I did read quite some stuff on the Saito technique, but I didn't get to the part where it mentions the independence of the two hands. But this is a subject that for me is also very much crucial in conducting technique. It's a little bit like a pianist. A pianist has, right hand and left hand. They are independent from one another. They play two different things and then they come together. And more or less the same concept should be applied to conducting, in the sense that the right hand needs to be able to do everything that the left hand does, and vice versa. So whatever I did with my right hand here, I can do with my left hand. Just in camera. Oh. And then close the phrase. So that you can switch hands whenever you need to.
Absolutely. But we hope it's not because your arm is tired or you're
to rest a bit, so let's switch arms. But yeah.
Do we have time to look briefly at the Rachmaninoff?
I think we have all the time that we want to, because we're not bound to any time.
Oh, okay. Did you want to do more?
As long as we want to be here. Yes.
Did you want to do more with the Beethoven?
No. Please go ahead. Actually, I brought up on the screen for our viewers. There is the first phrase of the Rachmaninoff. so they can actually see if they don't have the score at hand. They can see the first system.
Okay, I'm going to move some stuff around here. I guess with the screen being taken over, I had it on my other screen to show, but I think I remember it well enough. Most of the people I work with have the greatest difficulty with slow music.
Right.
And that, again, is a matter of trying to make sure that the ensemble and the conductor understand the subdivision in the same kind of way. So once we get started, it's not too bad. This particular piece, and I've just shown you this little brief string rendition of it, but if you were to look at the choral version, it starts with a voiced consonant where we have a ba. So we have to be aware of the fact that we're moving from that consonant into the next vowel sound before it can be heard. So we really do want to be as clear as possible. So if we were to go dee da dee da da dee da da dee, you'll notice that I use a from point gesture on the second beat, so that I don't have to go da da dee da da da, and allows a different kind of shaping. If I think about this as being more horizontal, I can have quite a large gesture and still have it be soft, because I don't need to have the dropping energy that's involved in it. And it can be very, very beautiful and smooth. So I might go dee da 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 dee da da dee. The critical part is I don't want to have a complete stop as I did with Senyu, because it breaks the line. So does that make sense for you?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, there is one thing that I certainly, it's a key point for everyone who studies conducting, knowing when the orchestra needs us and when they don't. And the second beat of the first and the second bar are certainly 2 points where they need us. Basically, there's a dotted note. They need the pulse in between to come off the dotted note altogether. But it's a legato line. You don't want to do pum, 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 pum. That chops everything up. So a point in between is exactly what they need. Now, if I were to do this myself, what actually catches my attention is, aside from the obvious dot point on the second beat of the bar, is the length of the notes, and the fact that you want to have a very smooth line and throughout the entire phrase. This is obviously one long phrase that is all legato in its way, right? However, the first two notes are not the same as the first downbeat to me. They have a direction, which would be, if I had to sing it, it would be pim, pim, pirari, going towards the downbeat, the first downbeat of the bar, right? At least that's my musical idea, interpretation.
The lyric
Me,
supports that. The lyrics support that idea.
yeah, okay, but sorry, but yeah, in the I actually took your arrangement, but in the video there are no lyrics. They only see the first line. Whoever's watching, they only see the first line.
Yes.
So if it was just that without the lyrics, then I would think that they're not even without the lyrics, I would think that you go from the first two notes. You're sort of walking yourself into resting on the downbeat, right? It
Yes,
has direction.
this is a choral work.
Yeah,
That does start with words.
yeah,
That's why I made this is not an introduction to a part that comes later with lyrics.
yeah. No, 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 no,
Yeah.
no. I got that.
Okay. So the point you made though is supported. That's how he's able to reveal the stress of the words as well. Is
Right.
exactly what you said.
So if I had to conduct this, for instance, first of all, orchestra only needs the third beat here, a pulse on the third beat of the bar to start. Uh, Sorry, on the second, because they start on the third, so they need one, and then this, which is exactly what you did actually, and then 2, 3, 4, and then 1 again. However, in order to give this idea of direction of the phrase, then the length of the note needs to be taken into consideration. Are they all the same length? Do they breathe in a different way? Because if they're not, then the gesture should reflect that in some sort of way. So, pim, pim, pirari, which means I'm making, it's an idea. If you want to keep it sort of steady, then 1, pim, pim, pirari, but that doesn't breathe through it in my opinion.
Then please consider this. If I start this and Saito defines how we move through the after point motion, which
Yeah,
is basically what you were doing, but he adds the concept of stretching
yeah.
or of pulling. So that's how I shape the timbre. If I go dee, 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 dee. I'm not doing up and
No, no, no.
down,
Of course not. You're not chopping the line
and I
in
can make it smaller too.
yeah,
So if I were to go dee, 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 I'm thinking of the voice, the
yeah.
wind, the breath, the bow motion to sustain that.
And um, going back to actually partially to what we were mentioning earlier, is the fact that why am I being I'm conducting actually smaller within a smaller space. Uh, Actually, this gives me a little more wiggle room on bar 3 to make the mezzo piano and then to come back to a pianissimo. That is another thing that I think is actually something that needs to be taken into consideration. The size of the stroke is directly proportional to the dynamic most of the time. Uh,
Only in the vertical dimension.
no, not necessarily. Why?
Absolutely.
I'm in a horizontal stroke here, and I'm still in piano.
Well, that's no, it has a big vertical component to it.
Well, the vertical component of area is in this case is just the pulse that it has at the bottom. Otherwise, they don't know where to place the notes, or the bows in this case. But what I'm getting to is the fact that this. See, but this is actually really, I find it really fascinating and interesting that in a lot of things, we're saying the same thing with different terminology. Uh, what you call the stretching or pulling of what do you call it? The pulling or the stretching of the gesture?
Yeah, either well, stretching and pulling are different.
Okay.
Stretching means that you simply don't have deceleration through the length of the sound. The pulling means that you actually show an energy through it.
And that's the
Yeah.
pulse that initiates the sound. But the
No,
yes,
that's the motion in the after point. That's the motion only in the after point, not in the
What's the
before
motion?
point motion.
I'm
So,
sorry, I'm not
y-
following.
yeah, as I suggested, there are four different elements to this kind of gesture.
Yeah.
So, if I were to go, there's the beat point. Now it's the after point. So if I go
Yeah.
D,
Okay, yeah, that's the after the pulse. Yes, yes. But no, what I was saying is that the size of the stroke can be limited and can be smaller as long as the space between one beat and the other is somewhat consistent. Uh, in other words, if I go from here to here at a speed that it's superior to the tempo that I'm playing with, and then getting ahead of the sound. And what that impacts is the quality of the sound that comes out, especially when you have to deal with a string orchestra, which these gestures reflect so much of. Um, so this kind of um, idea or thinking about the carrying of the sound from one stroke to the other um, is actually what makes it possible for me to use smaller gesture, still have that kind of sound that I would want in this piece, for instance, considering the composer especially. Um, Without getting too obvious or too big in gestures and keeping the intimacy without losing the sound in the process. Also, I do have one other thing. If you get too big, then you have no place to go. So once you get to the forte, where are you gonna go? There is no room left. You sort of have
there's
to.
the vertical room.
Uh, yeah, and you do the vertical. Yeah,
And it
okay.
all happens in the after point motion. What happens in the after point motion, it shows you the timbral quality. And in particular in a piece such as this, where we think primarily of the vocal sound, we're
Hmm.
concerned about how can we maintain the airflow so that we're not choking people. I want to
Yes.
show you a little set of gestures that we've often used to make an important point. These are from point gestures. We would probably never use them in front of an ensemble, but it would go D, 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 D. So we're thinking about how do we pull, how do we sustain that sound?
Yes.
So what happens before it?
I think what what you're showing is actually the carrying of the sound from one pulse point to another pulse point,
Absolutely.
and the fact is that you simply are keeping. You're feeling the resistance. It's like where if you were conducting underwater, you would feel the resistance of the
That's
water.
right.
If
Yes.
Which, by the way, is something that me and my colleague students have done when we were doing the conducting course. We went all to the swimming pool at Bard and started conducting underwater to practice it. Anyway, uh, but another exercise that we actually had to do was to feel the resistance. If you put your finger in front of the baton and you try to, then you feel the resistance
Yes.
on here. That's the kind of resistance that you have to feel from one point to another in order to carry the sound, pull the sound from uh, the orchestra out, and not
Yeah.
whiffing through it.
That's why I suggested before that if we can think about our gestures from where they start rather than where the pulse is made. So if we were playing pool or snooker and we hit the object ball, we want to make sure the object ball is in a place when we're finished that will allow us to make the next stroke. So
Yes, that's
it's
the preparation.
in
Yes.
in um, in graphic arts, we talk about negative space. Do you know
Yes.
that concept?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So
I
only the
actually had
brightest.
dealt with it in theater, actually, because
Yes, yes. So only the
yeah,
brightest or only the darkest spots. In
yes,
this particular case, if we start thinking, I'm going to move to this place. And I think that in some cases with conducting, if we can think about we're going to go to this place and then we're going to go to this place, it starts to allow somebody to relax
yeah.
the
Oh,
material
look.
that you're doing.
Oh,
So
oh, oh, look. Conduct. You know, Harold used to say that conducting is like a chess game. You have to know your moves ahead of time,
that's right.
and that is actually absolutely correct. You can't improvise because the moment you improvise, you're not preparing anything, the event, but you're conducting the event. And once you conduct the event instead of preparing it, then you are not ahead of the orchestra, but you're after the orchestra, which means you're not leading anymore, but you're following. That
Yes.
that
I think the other critical notion here is that Saito suggests that when we walk, we don't think about each little element of our walk. We just say, this is
absolutely,
where we're going.
yeah,
And so once we've connected gestures to our musical intention, that we will use those. Interestingly enough, all of his studies have very specific recommendations for each and every beat throughout the study.
yeah,
And then at the end, he says, do it a different way.
yeah,
So
yeah.
the whole idea here is that we need to develop those skills. And are people able to take each of these kinds of gestures? In the very introduction to his book, he says, we can do everything with a circle.
Yes,
That will
indeed,
establish the pulse.
indeed.
We can have different energy going into the pulse by acceleration. But of course, it's not useful. And we know that the players have just an instant for the corner of their eye to see what's going on with the gesture. If it's not consistent with what's going on in the music, as you've said, they'll put their head down and play anyway because they just want to get through all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But
And
the
then they make
joy,
the performance instead of the conductor. They make the performance for
that's
the
it.
conductor, and
But the joy of being able to do something with a fabulous ensemble that's led by the conductor, I think is something that we wish more people could have.
oh, totally,
So, and you
totally.
talked about the tip of the baton. We'd like to think of this as a bit of energy. By the way, I've used a laser pointer against
Yeah,
a
I saw
wall.
it in one of your videos. Yes, that you were showing with the laser pointer too.
Yeah. So the whole idea then is you see what is the symmetry of your gesture if you want that, or how big is it? And of course, a small motion here makes a big motion against the far wall.
Of course, of course. And uh, look, I mean, I think that in the end, we are approaching maybe things in a different way, partially at least, uh, to get to the same result. The point is that conducting demands a technique as much as playing the violin, playing the piano, playing the trumpet, playing the oboe, playing any other singing, playing any other instrument. Uh, and it's not, and it's something that, as in the same way that you acquire the technique for your instrument, then you can acquire the technique for conducting. And once you've acquired that technique, you don't think about it anymore. You just use it. If you're playing the violin, Beethoven's violin concerto, you're not thinking about, oh, I have a D major scale here, so I have to move from first to third position, and then I have to. You don't think about it. You just, you practice, and then once you play the concerto, the scale is part of the concerto, is not a technical element that you're sort of thinking uh, about how to do. That you do when you study and when you break it down and you just put the scale on the metronome. And the same thing should be with conducting technique. It's a technique. You study it, you practice it, And then once you acquire it, you forget it because it's part. It's a means to an end. It's a tool to show the music and your own interpretation of it. Uh, but if you don't have that technique to articulate your own music, then things can be incredibly difficult, incredibly frustrating, boring, and moreover, take way too much time for the time that we have nowadays for rehearsing a concert.
Can I share a couple of things that I found very useful here with the
By all
technique?
means.
We've talked about trying to allow the arm to fall so that we're not creating problems with the muscles. And one of the gestures that I see a lot is something that we refer to in the Saito book as shunkanundo, which is a sudden motion. But it isn't helpful to an ensemble if I go.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
you'll
Try to
see
play with that.
you'll see it happen many, many, many times.
Yeah.
So I've suggested to people that they put their baton up and they drop it and catch it.
Mm-hmm.
I used to do it with a set of keys until the keys perforated my hand. So the whole idea of having something that you really get a sense of where can I be? And the essence of what you were talking about before in shaping the gestures is we can put the gesture anywhere that we want, depending on the kinds of characterization we imagine. So, for example, often I see people trying to do music which is very fast. For example, in 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3,
Oh,
as
yeah.
opposed to 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. We don't
Yeah.
need to have those patterns. That's what you're talking about in breaking the patterns.
Yeah.
We need to make it sensible based on those basic concepts. There's an important book by Leonard B. Meyer who talks about the meaning of music. And he says that music has meaning if we create an expectation and delay its resolution. So, for example, you referred before to the notion of uh, a little change of tempo, a little rubato. So if I'm going 1, 2, 3, they can't play 1. I haven't finished 3 yet.
Mm-hmm.
So if we understand how that idea of the afterpoint motion, the rate of acceleration, and the placement, and all of the things that we do as conductors are dependent on the complexity of the music, in addition to what the players need, and the tempo. So sometimes with very rapid music, God forbid you have to do the Guyana suite. Anyway, the whole idea is that we adapt all of our gestures to the tempo and to the articulation, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera. So having this broad range of skills, I think is critical to really allowing us to fulfill our artistic ideas.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I hope that, well, we went on for more than an hour actually. I hope that whoever is watching will have some comments in the, if not now, later on, that they can think about. But I really hope, because this is a common thing that uh, a lot of us, or maybe not a lot, but some of us are trying to um, instill in younger conductors, uh, is the fact that once you acquire a technique that allows you to articulate the music, then pretty much you can do whatever you want with the music and with the orchestra. And you can drive them and lead them wherever you want to. And there is no secret about it. It's not a magic, this is not a magic wand. There's no Harry Potter charm behind it. It's a matter of hard studying, practicing, and that's it. Nobody can teach you music. Uh, the musicality that you have, yes, we can, teach you a way maybe to breathe through a phrase. what you were, or for instance, how I read this phrase of the Rachmaninoff. That's my own interpretation. I can teach you how I'm doing it, but I cannot do it for you. So you have to feel it, and that sort of feeling inside, there's only so much that we can teach. But technique is something that anybody can learn and should learn. uh, and the fact of the matter is that since we do not have a direct response, or we think that we don't have direct response between what we do and what our instrument is, then we don't really realize that right away. Now, if you're playing the violin and you're practicing and I don't know, you're out of tune, or you hit the wrong note, or you're not pacing yourself correctly with the bow, then you do realize that right away. And or your teacher does, or whatever. But when you're studying in that, you realize it and then you correct it. If you hit wrong notes on the piano, then you realize it and then you correct it. If you do a wrong, so to speak, gesture in front of the orchestra corrects it for you without you even knowing it, unless somebody has told you to look out for that. The thing here is that, and I'm going to go back to what we mentioned earlier, everything that we do in front of the orchestra has an impact on the sound that comes out. So the gesture that you just showed a few moments ago, which is it's an unfortunate one, which was this thing, which is like, okay, play, start. And if I have to play, I mean, how am I going supposed to do that? I'm gonna slam the bow, or blow in my trumpet or the oboe, and whatever comes out. If I do exactly that, then first of all, we're not going to be together. Second of all, it's going to come out a really harsh and ugly sound. So in that case, when you see somebody that does that, what does the orchestra do? They turn away the attention to the concertmeister, who does boom, and then they go down with the concertmeister.
That's right.
The orchestra takes care of the shortcomings of the conductor. But that particular gesture that you showed is the result of not knowing exactly the correlation that your gestures have with the orchestra. B, which is probably even worse, in my opinion, not breathing with it, whatever phrase it is that you're beginning. Because if you had to sing that following that gesture, you couldn't do it. It would be impossible. There is no boom. So if we don't think about breathing with the phrase, which means then breathing with the players themselves, whatever instrument they're playing, then our gesture cannot be organic with the music, and then we end up with these kind of chopping things that have absolutely no meaning to be.
Can I suggest one more thing?
Please go ahead.
I suggest that all conductors learn to play the drum set.
Learn to play the
drum set.
The drum set.
The drum set, in addition to whatever else they're doing. And I've often taught the players in at least a youth ensemble how to do some of the motions that a drummer would do. For example, right foot on every beat, left foot on every second beat as if it were a hi-hat, right hand as if it were eighth notes, left hand playing on the snare drum the same as the left foot. So the whole notion of developing some of that coordination, you can find some other fascinating sets of exercises on the internet where some are conducting in 2 with one hand and in 3 with the other hand. You can see all of the exercises Elizabeth Green demonstrates for some independence on YouTube. And during this time, we talked about how valuable it is, whether you're working with a group of youngsters or professionals, to have a chance to work with a real live response. There are some fabulous percussion ensembles, especially those by William Shinstein. I had a lot of fun with a piece called Rock Trap for percussion quartet without instruments. So if you want to get the feedback you need to develop your technique, that's a good way. And I also want to tell you that I had the joy of working with George Charpentier over many years. For 25 years, we worked conducting a youth orchestra. And the best way to find out about our conducting gestures was to have one of us play in the percussion section, either on bass drum or triangle, because you find out pretty quickly, and it can be a bit of fun. We're not deliberately trying to screw each other up, but the whole idea of having an idea of getting that kind of feedback, so that it takes it away from sort of servant and slave. We want to move past that. And earlier in our conversation before this live began, we talked about the difference in the relationship between the players and the conductor. I would like to suggest that it needs to be a respectful collaboration. I have my role. I prepare by learning the music, by understanding what's going on. I try always to understand what it is the motor inside the piece. So I'm typically never conducting the melody. It's almost always the interior parts. Maybe that's from playing second violin and viola for so long. But if you listen to how second violinists and violas sometimes have to adapt to improper gestures, I'll call them that, you really get a sense of what that's all about. And so the more we have the experience on being either side of the podium, the more we can figure out what is a particularly useful way of describing something without it taking a lot of words. And I encourage students to think about one or two words that would characterize a piece or a passage. What do you really want out of it? So that we don't have to have a long lecture in the middle of a piece. And I watched a famous conductor on in a rehearsal describing the use of parallel fifths in this particular piece of music. And I was thinking, yeah, big hairy deal. Write it down on a piece of paper, give it to them after the rehearsal. But right now, let's just play it. And let's figure out what you want us to do.
Yeah.
One more thing. I've had the experience in this last year of working with an outstanding composer by the name of Jose Elizondo. He makes his living as an engineer. He's responsible for some of the voice recognition products you use, such as Siri and Alexa and so on. But he wrote a particularly gorgeous piece called The Dawn of Hope. And we've had different arrangements of it and had different people playing it. And it's amazing how people change it with even a slight change in the metronome marking. We don't want to talk about Beethoven's metronome markings, but being respectful that way is critically important. But then also listening to performances that actually shape things often comes from the inside. And the whole idea of how can we make something, I like to use the term delicious. How can it be more delicious on a particular kind of note? How can we empower the players? Many years ago, our orchestra, our youth orchestra, had the chance to work with Georg Tintner. He was a fascinating character in the kinds of things that went on. And we were doing a piece where there was a bridge by a timpanist. And he empowered the timpanist to take us out of the previous passage and into the new one. He wasn't just concerned about his conducting. And that was a really important time for me. That we had this kind of engagement. The timpanist was completely capable of doing this and competent to do it every time. So sometimes that solves a lot of other problems that otherwise could be very complex. And not only that, but it engaged the whole ensemble. because all of a sudden they were listening to the timpanist in ways that they'd never done before. So that's the end.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. First of all, if you can be in an orchestra, be in an orchestra and see what it is from the other side, so you know what not to do. That's another thing. And second, I wrote an entire thing on how to talk to an orchestra in rehearsal.
Yes,
And one of the first point is don't give a lecture because the orchestra doesn't care about a lecture.
exactly.
They don't. They're there to play. And I think I know the bit that you are referring to, the video that you're referring to, and I also have another one in mind. But there's a lot of these that you can find on YouTube. The orchestra doesn't care. They're there to play, and that's it. And they're not there to listen to a 15 minutes lecture, half an hour lecture on how you see the waterfall colored in Debussy Prelude de la Première d'une Funk. They don't care. They don't care. They need clear instruction. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to take the imagery out of your conducting, but it simply means that you're not there to be the professor. That is a very old way of thinking. I'm here to teach you how this is done. That's not how it works anymore. You step on the podium. Yes, you're right. You have your own role. You're the conductor. You studied the music. You have your own idea. Your focus should be in getting everybody on board in order to create a uniform and homogeneous performance. Besides, of course, everybody being together and all that. But that's the ultimate goal. Not to teach them, sort of a sitting on your big thing and saying, oh, this is how you're supposed to be doing it. That doesn't. Nobody wants that. Nobody's going to go with that. You can try it, and they're going to play by themselves and completely ignore you because they don't care. What you have to actually take advantage of is the collective knowledge that everybody has. You have 20 people, 30 people, 50 people in front of you. All of them combined together know more than you do. It's simple math. Embrace that and take advantage of it. Involve them in some technical decision, because unless you play a specific instrument, and no conductor plays every single instrument in the orchestra, you cannot know
Just those
everything
of us who taught band in high school.
And there you go. I mean, I know about violin. Yes, that's it. I know the pedaling of the harp, but I don't play the harp. I cannot speak intelligently about the pedaling of the harp as an harpist. So if there is a passage where there is a specific thing about the pedaling of the harp, I ask the harpist for his or her good judgment. Same goes if you don't play the violin, if you don't play a string instrument, as the concertmeister, the section leader, for suggestions on bowings. There is no shame in it. It actually shows that you know that you are willing to embrace their expertise and accept their expertise in the matter, which is all that people want. They want to be included in something that is called a performance, which is supposed to be all together, not just one individual commanding with the stake and all the other following like a bunch of sheep. That's not how it works. That's not how you make a performance. That's how you sort of do something and pass time, but that's not a performance. That's not making music together. So I think we do you have anything to add? Wayne?
I guess what I know as a conductor is what I alone know standing at the front is blend and balance.
Sorry,
And
what?
blend and balance.
Blend and balance. Yes.
And I
Yeah,
can
I
give
guess, yeah.
feedback on that and try to do it consistently. I also think that everybody is very busy. And if I've selected a piece of music in a particular style, I really need to understand that style well enough so that I can share a couple of brief elements about it. I've been working with Mexican American music for a while, and it's amazing to hear and see how many people don't really understand the style.
Hmm.
And when I had a chance to work with it was a group in Brazil actually, where they were doing some Gershwin, and they didn't understand the Gershwin style.
Hmm.
That's our obligation up front, is to help bring those things about. But whether we do those by asking people to listen to recordings before the rehearsal, or we have something on paper that we share, or other memos that come across, I think that we need it to be efficient and effective. And we need to think about, how do we bring a certain joy to the kinds of things that we're doing? If we can't be a joy bringer as a conductor, then I think we're missing out on something special. And I learned many years ago that if I would smile at the beginning of a piece, or if I would smile when something had gone wrong, not a smirk, but a smile, it kind of, yeah, we all screw up from time to time, but as opposed to
Happens.
making a gesture that looked like I was furious or disappointed or whatever, I think I've seen enough of that other stuff. So practicing a nice smile, whatever that's going to be, in front of the group, and bringing some joy. Having a sense of humor is like any other relationship. Above everything else, we would like our friends and partners to have a sense of humor.
Absolutely. I actually totally agree. I think actually just to close up on this, um, I think this is one of the most difficult things to do as a conductor, is to understand that when you're on the podium, you can't hide. You, if you want to hide, a podium with a spotlight is the worst place to be. And and the orchestra, any orchestra, will see through you. Uh, so this whole idea of going up on the podium, with like this sort of a mask where you are like really all crunky, and I have, I know everything. I have so many thoughts in my head that yeah, that kind of thing. If you make a mistake, I'm gonna fire you on this. It really, first of all, it's a past idea and it doesn't stand anymore. And second of all, it's so fake that people would not respond to it. I would not respond to it if I were to play with something like that. It's much easier for everybody if you go up and exactly just said, put on a good smile. You make a mistake, everybody makes mistake. You say, I'm sorry, I screwed up, and it's not going to happen again. And you apologize. End of the story. That's another thing that you cannot hide from. Everybody, all 50 people, all 80 people, or 120 people have seen that you screwed up. They're not stupid. So if you try to blame somebody else, then you're really going to get on the wrong side of the orchestra, actually. Yeah, just say, I'm sorry, put a big smile, it's not going to happen again, and you move on. And the more you're transparent and relaxed and open to show what your feelings are in terms of the music, the more people will come in and join in and get some joy out of the rehearsal, out of the performance, out of the whole thing, out of the whole working together.
I want to tell you how much we appreciate your generosity, your openness, your
Oh,
big
thank you.
hug that you give everybody to keep us going. It's a very lonely life on that box in front, and
Yeah.
you're more likely to have uh, rotten tomatoes than kudos thrown at you. So everybody needs to support each other. We need to be as generous as you've demonstrated. So thank you. I applaud you, and we look forward to other positive kinds of interactions.
Well, thank you very much for coming to this session. I think it was really uh, great for everybody to see, uh, and certainly was a learning experience for myself as well. Uh, and I hope that it will push people to go deeper into whatever it is that you're saying, whatever it is that I'm saying, whatever it is that anybody else is saying, and to, you know, keep learning and keep finding new ways of showing who you are and what your music is on the podium. So thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
I'm always
And
pleased to share, and if people want to contact me, I'd be happy to share whatever they need.
yes, well, you're part of the group as well, and so they know how to contact you. And if you look up Wayne Toews on Google, then you'll find his website and his contacts on there. So he's really easy to find. I think this we can call it a day. And thank you very much again. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. And if you have any questions for me or for Wayne, just drop a post in the group. If they're if they're private questions, then just send us a private message. It's very easy. And have a very good rest of the day. Thank you, and till the next time. Ciao.
Ciao. I love your manner.